Experts believe that at least 25 million people died in the Pacific Theater during World War II, with some of the grisliest deaths befalling Chinese civilians who were systematically tortured by the Imperial Japanese Army. Europe is where a lot of history stories about World War II are set. There, the Nazis killed millions of people and caused a lot of damage across the land. But the Japanese also did terrible things during the war. The Imperial Army of Japan scared people everywhere it went in the Pacific Theater. More than 300,000 Chinese people were killed in the famous Rape of Nanking, and between 20,000 and 80,000 girls and women were raped. Japanese facilities with tight security, like Unit 731, did horrible medical tests on inmates and used deadly diseases to make weapons. And, against international law, Allied prisoners of war were often tortured and killed in horrible ways. Some Japanese soldiers were tried as war criminals and put to death after the war. A lot of other people, though, were never punished for their sins. Even now, some Japanese leaders and other well-known people either play down or completely deny that these horrible things happened. The Rape of Nanking, one of the worst Japanese war crimes. The Empire of Japan began a full-scale ground invasion of China in the summer of 1937 to put down Chinese resistance for good. After slowly taking over places like Shanghai, the Japanese soldiers moved on to Nanking, which was the capital of the country at the time. Japanese troops came to the capital city in December of that year. There were about 500,000 people and 90,000 soldiers living there. The Japanese got the Chinese forces to give up by telling them they would treat them fairly. The troops agreed, and they were killed right away. Since there were no guards around, the infamous Rape of Nanking started. Because it made no sense for them to feed prisoners or fight rebels for a long time, the Japanese troops killed almost everyone they saw. According to Newsweek, they flooded the city and shot unarmed people as they went door to door, killing anyone who lived there. A lot of civilians were killed, burned alive, buried alive, and starved to death. Babies were hacked up and then thrown into hot water. A rough guess is that between 20,000 and 80,000 women and girls were brutally raped. A lot of people, even Nazis, were shocked by the Rape of Nanking. During his time in China, German businessman John Ray was in charge of the local Nazi party. He saw terrible bloodshed and used his power to help save about 250,000 Chinese civilians. But things didn't go so well for hundreds of thousands of other people. Estimates vary, but it is thought that more than 300,000 Chinese people died in the Rape of Nanking. That's more than the amount of people who died in both Hiroshima and Nagasaki put together. The city was destroyed by order of Japanese General Matsui Iwane, who was later found guilty of many war crimes by the International Military Tribunal for the Far East. He was given the death penalty, but the horrible events of the Rape of Nanking still haunt Japan and China. Sex slavery. As news of the Rape of Nanking spread, top Japanese commanders became worried about how it might make Japan look. To stop more mass rapes and keep the Japanese troops happy, they ordered the growth of comfort stations, which are military brothels. History says that girls and women all over Japan-occupied Asia were stolen, forced, tricked, or sold into prostitution. Most of these girls and women were Chinese or Korean. These slaves, who were called comfort women, were raped all the time by their captors and other troops. At first, the other girls tried to protect me because I was so young. Yong Soo Lee, a Korean woman who was kidnapped and pushed into prostitution, told the Washington Post in 2015. The girls covered me with a blanket and told me to act like I was dead so nothing bad would happen to me. I had no idea what they meant. I was only 14 years old. Many records about comfort women were destroyed after World War II, and their legacy is still a point of contention between Japan and other Asian countries that the Japanese occupied. However, historians think that as many as 400,000 women and girls were forced into prostitution during the war. History says that about 90% of these people died before the war finished. either by suicide, murder, or illness. Only a few survivors are still living today, and they have never fully recovered from what happened. "I never wanted to give comfort to those men," Lee said. "That name was made up by Japan. I was taken from my home as a child. My right to be happy, to marry, to have a family. It was all taken from me. I don't want to hate or hold a grudge, but I can never forgive what happened to me." Germ Warfare. Germ warfare was one of the worst things the Japanese did during the war. During World War II, Japanese soldiers used deadly diseases like the bubonic plague as weapons and intentionally spread them to Chinese people. In the late 1930s, Japanese General Shiro Ishii built a hospital near Harbin, China, which was then a part of the Japanese client state Manchukuo. The building was known as the Epidemic Prevention and Water Supply Unit to the public. But Ishii had actually made the infamous Unit 731 and used people in a number of horrifying medical experiments. According to The Guardian, Unit 731 did tests that were meant to turn illnesses into weapons. They did horrible vivisections on prisoners who were still alive to grow samples of typhoid, cholera, and other diseases. There were also bombs made by the unit that were filled with fleas that had the bubonic plague and wheat, rice, or cotton. When these bombs were dropped on Chinese towns, they let the infected fleas out, which quickly spread the terrible disease to other people. Up to 300,000 innocent people may have died because of this germ warfare, but no one was ever found guilty for a very long time. That's because, after the war, the US secretly gave Ishii and his colleagues immunity in exchange for letting other countries see their cruel study. It wasn't until 2002 that a Tokyo court acknowledged that Japan had employed biological warfare during World War II, admitting, "The evidence shows that Japanese troops, including Unit 731 and others, used bacteriological weapons on the orders of the Imperial Army's headquarters and that many local residents died." Cannibalism, one of the most gruesome Japanese war crimes. Japan's cannibalism was one of their worst war crimes. A shockingly high number of Japanese people were caught cannibalism during World War II, but it took a long time for these cases to be found out. Japanese historian Toshiyuki Tanaka found more than 100 cases of Japanese Imperial Army forces eating enemy soldiers and civilians. At first, his work was deemed too sensitive to be published in Japan. Sometimes the Japanese troops were cut off from food and water, but Tanaka found that most of the time they had plenty to eat. Instead, they ate prisoners to win a battle or get closer to their group. "I think it was to get a feeling for victory and to give the soldiers nerves of steel," Tanaka told The Independent in 1992. He added that it helped units bond because the whole troop broke the taboo of cannibalism together. Tanaka wasn't the only one who wrote about this horrible Japanese war crime. During World War II, American and Australian forces said they saw signs of cannibalism while fighting Japanese troops. "The Japanese had cannibalized our wounded and dead soldiers. We found them with meat stripped off their legs and half-cooked meat in the Japanese dishes," Australian Corporal Bill Hedges later said of the gruesome sight. "We found dumps with rice and a lot of tinned food, so they weren't starving and having to eat flesh because they were hungry." Japanese troops eating American soldiers is one of the most well-known examples. In September 1944, a group of US pilots were shot down while bombing Chichijima Island. In the so-called Chichijima incident, Japanese troops caught, tortured, and killed almost all of them. Then they ate their flesh. Only one of the downed pilots, 20-year-old future US President George H.W. Bush, was able to avoid being caught and killed that day. The Bataan Death March. Around 75,000 Filipino and American soldiers had to march 65 miles through terrible weather after giving up to Japanese troops on the Bataan Peninsula in the Philippines in April 1942. Thousands of men died during the so-called Bataan Death March. It is one of the most well-known Japanese war crimes of World War II. America and the Philippines joined together to form the US Army forces in the Far East. Their first fight with the Japanese happened in December 1941, when Japan invaded the Philippines. But because most US troops were getting ready to join World War II, the USAFFE had no air or sea support, and only half as much food during the deadly battle. The American and Filipino men finally gave up in April 1942 after fighting the Japanese for a few months. After taking them hostage, the Japanese made them walk 65 miles to jail camps. Their goal wasn't just to move their prisoners, it was to kill them all, whether they are destroyed individually or in groups, and whether it is accomplished by means of mass bombing, poisonous smoke, poisons, drowning, or decapitation, dispose of them as the situation dictates, the Japanese War Ministry ordered, per history. It is the aim not to allow the escape of a single one, to annihilate them all, and not to leave any traces. There were between 17,000 and 27,000 Allied deaths during and after the Bataan Death March. Most of them were Filipino forces, and a lot of them died very horrible deaths. One of the POWs had a ring on, and the Japanese guard attempted to get the ring off, remembered an American survivor. He couldn't get it off, and he took a machete and cut the man's wrist off, and when he did that, of course, the man was bleeding profusely. I tried to help him, but when I looked back, I saw a Japanese guard sticking a bayonet through his stomach. Lieutenant General Masaharu Homma of Japan was found guilty of this war crime and given the death penalty after the war. The torture and execution of Allied POWs. The Geneva Convention already set up rules to protect prisoners of war, but the Japanese often didn't follow them. During World War II, they often abused and killed prisoners from the Allies. According to History Collection, Allied prisoners of war were tortured by being made to drink a lot of water until they passed out. Then someone would jump on their stomach, which would push the water out. There were also rumors, though not proven, that the Japanese tied prisoners of war to beds of sharp bamboo, which grew quickly and stuck them. Allied prisoners of war were also sometimes used in horrible medical tests. Japanese doctors put horse blood or seawater into them, or just left them to freeze so they could study what happens when you get frostbite. Most of the time, these experiments were just long killings. In fact, a lot of prisoners of war were killed quickly. 4 of our group escaped, Tech. Sergeant Richard Henry Peterson said, per the US Army. I, along with 3 other men, was taken to the Japanese commander. He alternated between questioning and beating us with a belt and a bamboo stick from 8 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon. The 4 of us denied knowing anything about the escape. Actually, we knew everything. We were finally taken back to our compound, and the guards took our 4 top officers to the commander. We saw a Jap firing squad take them out of sight and heard the shots as they were executed. As the Allies' chances of winning grew, a lot of prisoners of war were put to death. 150 prisoners of war were sprayed with gasoline, set on fire, and shot with machine guns in Puerto Princesa, Philippines. Only 11 guys lived through that massacre. In the end, several Japanese leaders were found guilty of war crimes because they had given orders for Allied prisoners of war to be tortured and killed. But in the end, many of them were given pardons. Pearl Harbor, one of the most infamous Japanese war crimes. Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor in Hawaii on December 7, 1941, is one of their most well-known war crimes. Then Japanese planes showed up out of the blue and bombed most of the US Pacific Fleet. They hurt or destroyed almost 20 US ships and 300 US airplanes, and they killed 2,400 American troops and civilians. America joined World War II because of this attack, which was a war crime because the Japanese didn't give any warning. PearlHarbor.org says that the Hague Convention of 1907 made it clear that any attack that happened without previous and explicit warning was illegal under international law. Japan and the United States both signed the Kellogg-Briand Pact in 1928. It said that acts of war like Pearl Harbor should not be used to settle disputes or conflicts of whatever nature or of whatever origin they may be, which may arise among them. It turned out that the Japanese had actually made a warning for the US. The package was sent, but not until after the blast. The Franklin D. Roosevelt Presidential Library and Museum says this was because the message took too long to translate and type up. It wasn't sent to American leaders until a long time after the attack had begun. When the war was over, the Tokyo War Crimes Trials decided that the attack on Pearl Harbor was wrong. Many high-ranking Japanese leaders were charged with murder and crimes against peace. We hope you liked this video. Watch another video here.